You're listening to the Curio-city Collective podcast.
I'm Arpita.
And I'm Deepika.
आओ यहाँ बताऊँ मैं कैसा महसूस करती हूँ। दुनिया में अंधेरा हो ऐसा महसूस करती हूँ। ये भीड़ भाड़ ये चहल पहल कुछ नहीं अब भाता है। न रोज़ाना सी यारी है न कोई मिलने आता है। आओ यहाँ बताऊँ मैं कैसा महसूस करती हूँ। अंधेरा हो जैसे दुनिया में ऐसा महसूस करती हूँ।
That's the voice of 15-year-old Sanya from the Govandi slum in Mumbai, setting her COVID lockdown experience to song. Let me tell you how I feel. That the world has gone dark. That's how I feel.
And that bit about na koi milne aata hai, that no one visits anymore. You can feel such a strong sense of being trapped at home in those words. And yet she's writing and rapping about it, which makes it somehow an act of strength, even as it is an heart-rending account of the loneliness that the lockdown brought.
Yeah, the COVID-19 virus seems to have spared most adolescents from the worst of its effects, but they were not immune to the severe stress of living in the middle of a pandemic.
I'm all the more intrigued as it's not only an adolescent girl writing this, but it's a young girl from particularly difficult circumstances writing about this. The pandemic and lockdowns were hard on everyone, but the people in the slums of Mumbai and other such spaces with their super dense population and one-room homes had it very, very hard.
You know, even back in 2020, a UC Berkeley report pointed out that the shelter-in-place strategy, that is staying at home during lockdowns, was a luxury of the wealthy, and it would be hard for people dwelling in slums, as rarely do they have an option of sitting at home, as it often means giving up work and even basic necessities like food and water and sanitation. And today's conversation goes along those lines, but further, as we discuss in particular the experience of young girls in slums through the pandemic years.
Okay, then let's get started. So tell me, who did you talk to?
Two women, actually. The first was Swarnlata Mahilkar, who facilitated and helped structure and shape the research process that we'll be discussing today. She's a Girl Fellow with Empower India, which is a global philanthropy focused on supporting at-risk youth in countries like India.
My name is Swarnlata, and I work as the Girl Fellow at Empower. I co-manage Empower's programs that we run with adolescent girls and young women for building their leadership and agency. Empower has been working in urban areas of India from past 20 years. We work with our grantee partners, and along with them, we have been working with young people, especially adolescent girls and young women who belong to the marginalized communities, and they live in extremely underprivileged settings in urban cities in India. And for the COVID in Her Voice research, my role was to co-design and co-facilitate participatory processes with 25 girl leaders who are part of Empower's Leaders Lab.
And if you're wondering what exactly Swarnlata means by marginalized here, she explained it further.
They are marginalized because of their economic background or their class, their gender or caste, disability, religion, and so on. They live in very urban, poor settings, mostly in slum areas of these cities, where getting the basic amenities like water, electricity is an everyday struggle for them. Majority of them live in very tiny houses or single rooms that they share with 5 or 7 other family members. There are multiple issues girls were already facing even before the pandemic.
Got it. Swarnlata and her organization support girls from urban slums, from these marginalized communities, to find their own voices and build their leadership skills. But what is the COVID in Her Voice research that Swarnlata mentioned here?
Well, that's what we'll be discussing in detail today. And to help us talk about it in depth, we have one very special person I need to introduce.
My name is Shireen Ansari, and I'm 23 years old, and I was a member of Empower's Leaders Lab from Mumbai.
I spoke to Shireen, who's a very articulate and confident young woman. She has a powerful voice, many reflections to share, and in typical Mumbai fashion, spoken a mix of Hindi and English.
She sounds delightful.
Yeah, and her awareness is so high, and the fact that she's able to step back, reflect on her life, and take action towards the life that she does want to live is so inspiring to hear about.
Well, I sense that we have a lot of things to break down for me to understand this whole thing properly.
Yeah, and now that you've met the two people I spoke to, let me explain what the COVID in Her Voice research was all about. So it's a girl-led research into the impact of COVID-19 on marginalized girls and young women across 7 cities in India. And to conduct this research, Empower didn't just go out and hire a bunch of researchers. Instead, they took a very different approach.
At Empower, we believe that girls are the experts of their own lives and they are best positioned to talk about their experiences and their challenges, and not just about their challenges, but also possible solutions to their problems, and most importantly, guide all of us. I believe that nothing can be more authentic and right than the lived experiences of people, and in this case, the girls. So that's how we reached out to the girls and not to someone or people who are formally trained to do this research.
So Empower actually invited adolescent and young girls from marginalized contexts to lead and conduct the research themselves. That's what you meant by girl-led research.
Exactly. And are you familiar with Roger Hart's ladder of children's participation?
Yeah, kind of. So Hart made this ladder on which he organized different levels of participation of youth in policy processes. The lowest rung was where there was no participation but manipulation, and the highest rung was actually youth-led conversations.
Exactly. So what Empower wanted to do was have a research process and report that was totally led by young girls, the highest form of participation. But they recognized the fact that they would need training and support to take on that role, and hence the Leaders Lab was created.
It was a 3 months long process which was designed to provide training and support to girls to lead this research. So all of them who came together to do this research were first-time researchers, and our role was to facilitate participatory processes for them to be able to conduct this research and play an active role in decision-making at every stage of the study. They were involved in every decision regarding their study, right from designing the questionnaire to selecting the participants, conducting interviews in the field, analyzing the data, and mapping the stakeholders who they think were the best suited to act on their recommendations.
That sounds really great.
It really was, and so I went step by step to understand how the study unfolded.
First of all, we launched the Leaders Lab, where I was around 23, just like I said, I was 23 years old, but the girls we had in our group, they were from at the age of 13 to 24 age group, and we were from Ahmedabad, Alwar, Bareilly, Delhi, Lucknow, Mumbai, and Pune, different cities of India.
Like Shireen says, the first step to the Leaders Lab was to pick 25 young girls across 7 cities in India who would be studying the impact of COVID on their peers.
But tell me one thing before we go into the next step. What was Shireen's own thoughts going into this space? I mean, what did she feel about joining the Leaders Lab?
Well, here she's describing it in her own words, how the opportunity intrigued her and how the idea of meeting her own peers and making a report of their own based on their own experiences was very exciting.
First reason why I wanted to join this program or be a part of it was this, because I could see the changes and the effects of COVID or this pandemic in my life. I could see that, okay, I'm just trapped here. But I thought, what if am I the only one who's going through this, or are there any other girls who's feeling the same thing like me? So I thought, okay, क्या कर सकते हैं? Like, क्या हो सकता है? So let's just find out, because this is an opportunity for me to find out. Through this report, I could, explore and find out कि बाकी लड़कियों को भी ऐसा फील हो रहा है या सिर्फ मैं ही हूँ ऐसी. So I thought, ठीक है. But second part जो ये research का था, which is the most exciting part for me, was कि ये report में girls were the researchers and the girls in our community were the respondents. So basically, अगर मुझसे मेरी कोई problem पूछे या फिर if I were asked to share my problems, मैं किसके साथ ज़्यादा अच्छे से share कर पाऊंगी? A girl who is of my age, living in my community, going through the same thing as I am, तो मैं उसके साथ शायद ज़्यादा comfortable हो पाऊंगी. Maybe लड़कियां ज़्यादा open होकर खुलकर बता पाएंगी कि क्या हो रहा है लॉकडाउन में उनके साथ या कैसा उनको फील हो रहा है. तो I thought कि ये बहुत exciting चीज है.
So true, really. Any of us is more comfortable speaking about difficult experiences with our trusted friends and peers than some random stranger.
And in this very simple way of having the girls manage the whole journey of the report, Empower's given the girls a sense of valuing their voice, their experience, and their opinion.
So what happened next post the selection? I'm guessing it was time to begin the training process?
Yes, so the next step was to actually work with the girls to build a questionnaire. Empower then curated and facilitated 2 sets of online masterclasses to equip the girl leaders with technical and soft research skills to actually conduct the research.
Right, because research is also just about how you're asking questions and responding to the person you're speaking with. So after this step of prepping up?
Yep, and then it was off to the field.
Where we, the girl researchers, we went into the community during the lockdown, and we interviewed, each leader had interviewed 6 girls, basically. So we interviewed and find out what was the impact on their life of the COVID-19.
And after the girl leaders conducted this research, interviewing 6 girls each, as Shireen said, it was time to put together the data and begin the process of analysis and report writing. Empower held a masterclass with the girl leaders where they shared key trends and findings with the group. They also brought in a bunch of sector specialists to share their insights on the findings, but ultimately it was the girl leaders who took the call on what made it to the final report.
That is quite an intense process for the girls, and I can see why they call it a leaders lab and not just a research lab. Because through this long step-by-step process, they're not only building research skills for the project, but really critical thinking skills, learning how to articulate problems, how to talk to people about shared concerns, building empathy and so much more. And these are life skills.
Exactly. And as the organization's name goes, the heart of the process is empowering the girls to be leaders within their own communities.
Okay, so now that we understand the actual research process, let's come to the outcomes. What did the girls figure out through this process?
Well, to truly understand what shifted for the girls during and after the pandemic, I wanted to first understand what their experience was before the pandemic from Shireen, who was the girl leader from Mumbai.
I live in Mumbai, born and brought up here. But when I say Mumbai, so people start to imagine the city life of here, actually. But I live in Mumbai, slum of Mumbai, actually, called Dharavi. We have the same problems like overpopulation. The population of Dharavi, if you search it, as the BMC said during the lockdown, so the population is around 16 to 17 lakhs in that area. And we have these issues like not having enough space. So people here, like myself, we live in a house of 1 room only. So we have kitchen in that room only. We have the toilet spaces in that room only. So we live in a 1 room area only. And girls are expected to stay at home and basically support their family, and boys can go out whenever they want and whenever they can. So that's the life. And people here living here, they are basically daily wagers, because we are not people here, majority of the people here are not illiterate enough. So basically most of them are daily wagers like that, and they work like leather works, and they do works in a factory, small factories, which is called in Hindi karkhane. So usme they work.
To put that in perspective, Dharavi is considered one of Asia's largest slums with a density of 430 persons per square acre, so there's already immense pressure on available resources. The other girl leaders also came from similar communities in other cities.
Right, so like we discussed, even before the pandemic, there were challenges the girls faced because of their difficult circumstances.
Yes, and within these circumstances, it's important to point out that the girls experienced the impact of gender disparity, as Swarnlata shared.
Access to and quality education has been an ongoing issue for girls in these communities. Majority of them go to government schools or poorly run private schools. And in case of any financial adversity, they are the ones whose education gets stopped first. Another issue which is related to this is school dropouts, and it increases with every phase of education for girls due to increased household work, care work that they provide to their younger siblings, pressure to get married, etc. Patriarchy and gendered behavior and attitude of our society that limits girls' opportunities and agency to make decisions about their lives. There is still a preference given to boys over girls, and these lead to other connected issues like access to public spaces, restrictions on their mobility, restriction to go out, and they also face gender-based violence when they try to exercise their choices and desires. So these are some of the things they were already facing. And due to this discrimination, gender discrimination, exclusion and marginalization which they were facing, it just makes them invisible in their own cities and in their own communities. So their voices are not often heard by people.
Steering clear of structures that have made young women like Shireen feel voiceless, I wanted to hear from her about what her day was like before the pandemic.
Morning and afternoon, we used to go to our continue our studies in the schools before lockdown, and we used to go out for tuitions or to meet our friends. But in the evening, we were expected to work in the kitchen or serve with our mothers, or support our family basically. So that was our day where we can go out sometimes, not every day, but sometimes. And if we had schools, so we were allowed to go out, but only for schools. Other time we were expected to stay home. That was the life before COVID, before the lockdown.
As Swarnlata mentioned earlier, care work was always a big part of Shireen's day, but there were moments of freedom, moments when she could get out and address her own needs, meet her friends, get an education, think about a future she could build for herself.
And did that change dramatically with the lockdowns?
Living in the same room with my family of 6 members, it was kind of difficult because everyone was at home, and my siblings, my brothers, they were allowed to go out. They can meet their friends or go out or play in the ground or stay in the open areas. But I was staying at home, so it was kind of in my mental health was affected due to this, because I was staying at home, working. Same thing happening to my friends also. They were staying at home also, and they were doing this work. But I believe that lockdown was implemented on all of us, right?
One room for 6 members and not getting a chance to get out at all for weeks on end sounds really hard.
And all the more when you consider that girls like Shireen were pulled into doing endless loops of housework, whereas the men and the boys were given some leeway in this matter. Other girls in the Leaders Lab also came back with similar field outcomes. A 22-year-old participant from Pune shared that while before the lockdown she only had to help her mother in the evening, she was now expected to work with her all day. Swarnlata shared the exact statistics that emerged from the research.
For girls, the pandemic has intensified the gender division of work. In the research, 80% of girls said that the household work continues to be their responsibility despite everyone being home during the lockdown. It's not that the situation was very good before it and there was gender equality. We were aware of it, but what the pandemic did, it just increased the burden of work on girls. Out of this 80%, 71% said that they were getting help primarily from other female members or relatives from their families. And only 9% of male relatives were helping them in household chores. We could see the kind of gender imbalances here as well.
Right. So one of the really big outcomes was that there was a massive increase in care work for the girls.
Yeah, and don't forget that strong sense of being trapped, of being isolated that we heard in Sania's rap at the beginning, which is echoed here by Shireen and her peers.
Post-lockdown, it was everything was turned upside down, because post-lockdown, abhi kisi ke ghar nahi mil sakte, and we do not have public space, bahar nahi ja sakte, where boys can go but girls cannot. So kya kare? So अगर पब्लिक स्पेस होती भी तो वी कुड हैव मीट ऑन वीकडेज, बट वीकेंड पे ही मिलना था, और साइन के धारावी के बाहर जाना, साइन या दूसरे एरिया में, इट वाज डिफिकल्ट फॉर एवरी डे, है ना. सो हर दिन नहीं मिल पाते थे वीकेंड पे. पर पोस्ट लॉकडाउन वो भी अपॉर्चुनिटी वी हैड लॉस्ट, बिकॉज अभी कहाँ जाए, अभी तो घर से बाहर ही नहीं निकलने मिल रहा है.
They broadened it out in the report to say that COVID has exacerbated existing gender inequities for adolescent girls and young women. The lockdown not only increased unpaid care work, but also increased pressure for early marriage, increased exclusion and neglect, and closed up spaces for mutual support and solidarity.
I did come across multiple reports and articles saying how an increase in gender-based violence at home took place because women and girls could not access safe spaces outside home and were often stuck 24/7 with their abusers.
And so much so that it was termed the shadow pandemic. And not just that, one of the girls also reported how she faced violence even while trying to use the shared community toilet resources, having instead to trudge much further for her own safety to access bathrooms.
Sounds so terribly isolating and hard for the girls. I have to ask though, because the new generation is so tech savvy, was it not possible for the girls to keep in touch through phones at least, or was that also not possible?
It's interesting that you asked that because one of the things that came out in the conversation with Shireen was the lopsided and gendered access to technology and what that meant for the girls.
We were staying at home, even my friends were staying at home and my peers. So I could observe that everyone was staying at home. And जिनके पास device था, so we could sometimes chat with each other or had a call. जिनके पास device था, but जिनके पास device नहीं है, so we had lost connection with them.
You know, as it is, economic constraints mean that access to phones and computers is limited in slum households. And within that also there's a hierarchy of access. The Malala Foundation did a study in India to check on access to technology for education and found that male family members often hold the authority at home and thus have the power to limit or deter girls' phone usage. Only 26% of girls said they could access the phone present in the household whenever they wanted to, compared to 37% of boys.
So at a time when all the education systems shifted to online spaces, how did the girls manage?
That's the thing, many didn't. The leaders noted in the report that many girls did not have the resources, technology, or equipment to attend digital school. They expressed having difficulty keeping up with their studies and could no longer interact directly with their teachers or receive support from classmates. Swarnlata gave us the finer details here.
64% girls reported that they do not get time or have space to study online. So everything has become online after the pandemic, and all the students from any class, they are expected to just follow the same kind of method for learning, which is online learning. So as it is, learning became difficult for many of them. Most of them had to leave their studies because they had no resources to continue it. Their parents had lost their jobs, so they could not continue. In our research, the data, only 72% said that they have tools, but out of those, 66% said that they find online learning difficult. And 64, as I just mentioned, 64% girls said that they do not have space or time.
I was reading the World of India's Girls, or WINGS 2022 report by Save the Children, which reinforces what Swarnlata says. It found that 67% did not attend online classes during lockdowns. Or put differently, only 1 in 3, or 33% of girls attended online classes during the lockdown. Adolescent girls in urban slums were also deprived of basic health and education services compared to boys over the course of the pandemic. And you know, while stats are useful to get a sense of the big picture, it was this story Shireen shared with me of a young girl who lived near her place that really brought home what happened during the pandemic.
My neighbor who lives with us for 3-4 years actually, तो she has actually 2 kids. एक जो है उनका एक छोटा बेटा है. He is in 5th standard, and उनकी एक जो बेटी है, she is of my age, around 19 years old. So she's in college. But what happened during the lockdown? Auntie has the phone, so उनके पास एक ही device था, and her kids did not have access to the device. So online education थी, तो auntie told them, I observed that कि उनकी मम्मी उनको बोल रही हैं कि okay, let the boy study because he's in 5th standard and he needs to study. And it's okay if he told her daughter that it's okay if you miss your sessions or college lectures because, you can help me in the kitchen and you can work with me and do other things because यहाँ पे सब घर में कुछ ना कुछ करते हैं. So उनकी मम्मी ने ही वो लड़की को बोला कि it's okay if you miss your lectures, but तुम्हारे भाई को करने दो, it's important for him.
Wow, so the college-going daughter's education was deprioritized for the son's education.
Yeah, and in fact, this very serious concern about girls dropping out of education systems was echoed worldwide. Malala Yousafzai, the Nobel Prize winner, who's the co-founder and board chair of the Malala Fund and a passionate voice for girls' education, reinforced this point about the impact of the pandemic on girls' education in an IMF meeting.
The world is facing a girls' education crisis. There are 130 million girls out of school, and this is a figure that comes from before the pandemic. Now there are millions of more girls at risk of losing education because of the COVID-19 pandemic, but also climate change and conflicts. And when we were starting at 2020, this was supposed to be a decade of delivery. We were hoping that we would see more progress, but unfortunately, because of these external shocks and because of a lack of investment in education, we are seeing a reversal of the achievements and the progress that has been made so far for girls' education. And I'm worried about not seeing any progress in the coming years. So it is, a reminder to all of us that we need to accelerate our efforts for girls' education.
I just can't imagine how tough it must have been. It's the pandemic when already there is high anxiety over the possibility of falling seriously ill. And then to top it, you are relegated to your little home where there is no personal or recreational space or the possibility to connect with your friends and peers. You are on non-stop house duty to the point where you cannot even pursue your own education.
Exactly, and so it comes as no surprise that another important arena that the girls covered in the report is about mental and physical well-being.
90% of girls told experiencing mental health distress and despair, including depression, lack of confidence, loneliness, lingering sadness, etc. And many of them reported having negative thoughts and feeling of less motivation to do things which they would otherwise enjoy doing. So this is something we all should keep in mind and also should take this very seriously, because whenever we think of slums and working with girls and children, I mean, it's mostly about education, about gender equity, or providing basic amenities to them. But I think mental health is as important an issue in their lives as other issues. And we could also see that all of these findings are interconnected. They are linked to each other.
Absolutely agree with Swarnlata there. Holistic well-being is an outcome of multiple variables in a person's life.
In fact, the leaders noted in the report that most girls reported at least one mental health challenge, and none of them had any information on coping mechanisms except expressing a desire to talk to their friends or teachers instead of family members. And again, there are other reports which back this experience of the girl leaders. For example, the Alone Together report by NGO Angan, which took a similar approach of adolescent girls and young women, interviewing their peers specifically on the impact of loneliness exacerbated by the pandemic in their lives.
And what did they find?
That 84% of those interviewed said they experienced recurring loneliness, and that for 67%, the most challenging aspect of the lockdown was the absence of any kind of social interaction. To add to this, it became tougher to access basic healthcare services as resources were diverted because of COVID-19. So already vulnerable communities were now more at risk. And combined with economic pressures, affording health services and menstrual products became even more difficult.
The girls really worked hard to shine light on each facet of their complex experience of the pandemic.
Yeah, but I think we come to the next really powerful aspect of this whole endeavor. Now that the girl leaders had got clear outcomes from their research, a bunch of ideas emerged on how things needed to be done differently, and from those ideas emerged a desire to make their voice heard and to reach out to policy and decision makers.
तो जो पॉलिसीज एग्जिस्टेंस में है मे बी उसमें चेंजेस आने चाहिए बिकॉज लड़कियों को उनसे बेहतर कोई नहीं जान सकता. तो एटलीस्ट प्रैक्टिशनर्स एंड पॉलिसी मेकर्स को पूछना चाहिए कि उनको समस्या क्या है और उसका सोल्यूशन या उसका हल क्या हो सकता है. सो आई थिंक दिस इज द फर्स्ट एस्पेक्ट ऑफ आवर रिसर्च के रिफॉर्म करो, चेंजेस लाओ हमारे पॉलिसीज में. सेकेंड एस्पेक्ट इज ट्रांसफॉर्म इज बेसिकली के कोई पॉलिसी है जो काम ही नहीं कर रही है. इफ यू थिंक दैट दिस इज नॉट गोइंग टू वर्क, then our problem is way difficult and way different than this and this is not the solution, then I think कि उनको उस problem के लिए उस समस्या का हल जो है वो completely change करना चाहिए. तीसरा एस्पेक्ट है हमारी रिसर्च का, इट इज एस्पायर जहाँ पे लड़कियों ने किया है कि हमारी बातें सुनो, हमारी समस्या सुनो और आप देखो कि उसका हल क्या है जो हमारे recommendations में है.
As Shireen explained, their main clarion call was to reform, transform, and aspire. By reform, they implied bringing in incremental changes that can immediately be made to existing policies, schemes, or intervention. By the word transform, they implied bringing in new ideas. And finally, aspire was a call to bring in visionary ideas which can help realize the vision that the girls are suggesting.
That is powerfully put, and really a concept that speaks to the true spirit of democratic decision-making, which should ideally keep the demands and aspirations of the common people at the heart of policy making.
Indeed, and the report points out that the beginning of change is to give the girls a seat at the table of decision-making, ensure that they are heard by decision-makers and other stakeholders.
Okay, so what kind of recommendations are we talking about here?
Well, an important arena of conversation, as Swarnlata put it, was education.
They want us to create enabling spaces for them to continue their education, think about their future, and also think about their dreams. They are also saying that work with the community so that we become able to work on our dreams and our future. And when they were saying that, okay, invest in our education, create resources, create opportunities for us, what they were also saying was that do all of this so that we become independent. We feel confident to speak up. We feel confident to form our opinion. We feel safe in our own communities.
Swarnlata explained that the girls spoke about education a lot as they could see how it was central to building a better future for themselves and how it was interrelated to other issues. A key ask was for education to be made free for girls till class 12 because it allows them to have greater bargaining power at home, and with parents to be able to say, it's taken care of, just let me continue to study. And by being able to do that, they're able to push away the pressures of early marriage and are able to access peers and teachers in the outside world.
Of course, that makes perfect sense. It's amazing how one little step can bring in so much change.
And when I was looking through the report, I realized that the girls had taken a life cycle approach to it, where in their recommendations, they've covered the need for ensuring that girls firstly are brought up in neighborhoods where they have the requisite resources to provide them with genuine opportunities for growth and well-being. And this spanned everything from ensuring access to basic infrastructure like bathrooms, to educational facilities, counseling support, and even access to equal public spaces, as Shireen puts it here.
As I said, we do not have access to a public space. So iske liye, actually, public space is open for everybody, even for the girls and for the boys. But it is completely occupied by the men or males. So ladkiyan agar jayengi bhi to they are not feeling safe. So I think in each community, there should be a space only for girls. तो ट्रांसफॉर्म करो उनकी पॉलिसीज की पब्लिक स्पेस है, पर लड़कियों के लिए है क्या ऐसी कोई जगह जहां वो जा सके, वहां वो मिल सके? हर रोज फ्रेंड्स के घर पे या सिर्फ वीकेंड्स में मिलना इज नॉट ओके. तो ऐसी कोई जगह है क्या? तो ट्रांसफॉर्म दैट थिंग.
And from the developmental phase, the report then extends to looking towards their future, where recommendations have been made for policies and programs that ensure better and safer mobility for girls through the city, skill building and training for improving job prospects, and leadership training. Gigi, there's just so much thought and detail in there. And having done all this reflective work, the girls have shown us the possibilities and the path to supporting young girls to live up to their full potential. Now, as Swarnlata puts it, the ball is in our court.
Girls have talked about their issues, the challenges which they are facing, or they were facing even before the pandemic, and its impact on their lives and their recommendations. Now, we have big responsibilities to raise resources for making those recommendations real. And so we need to work on those recommendations now. And when I say we, it's all of us. It's the donor organization, it's government, it's city planners, corporates, civil society and communities. So all of us have to work towards to make those recommendations real and build a society where girls feel safer, confident, feel that they belong here.
I don't think anyone could disagree with Swarnlata there. When we speak of cities and the well-being of all, we need to give special attention to the voices and thoughts of those marginalized within these spaces. And now that we have heard from them, each of us is responsible within our own capacities to consider how we can build towards their dreams. Although this has been a difficult conversation, I must admit it's also been refreshing and lovely just to be able to hear and witness how the girls themselves have transformed through this process of the Leaders Lab into advocates for, their own and the rights of others, be it girls and women, and even their own larger communities.
Truly, and all the more so as, through this conversation, I actually got to hear Shireen speak so articulately for herself. And really, her own journey is so inspiring because it also reflects so much of the everyday struggle and bias that women across geographies experience. And yet how clear she is about what needs to change and why that's urgent. So it seems fitting to end with these beautiful words from her.
I would like to share a quote by Meghan Markle. As she said, women don't need to find a voice, they have a voice. They need to feel empowered to use it. And people need to encourage to listen to it. with that said, I think this is my answer to your question basically, because women के पास उनको आवाज ढूंढने की जरूरत नहीं है. They have a voice. उनको सिर्फ लोग चाहिए जो उनकी आवाज सुनने के लिए तैयार हैं, और लड़कियों को हिम्मत चाहिए अपनी आवाज आगे तक लाने के लिए.
To know more about the experiences of adolescent girls and young women during the lockdown, read Empower's COVID in Her Voice report. You can also read NGO Angan's Alone Together report, which is an action research paper on urban adolescence, loneliness, and the challenges they were facing in the lockdown. We'd also like to thank Sanya Mistry, whose rap you heard in the beginning of this episode that's so powerful and poignant. In our next episode, we're excited to hear from Deepa Mohan, well-known birder and naturalist guide based in Bangalore, who's a mentor and inspiration to many people by deepening their interest in nature, birding and wildlife thanks to her walks. Don't forget to listen in. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for more episodes. You can follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or a podcast app of your convenience. We're also on YouTube, so look up the channel, The Curio-city Collective, or follow us through our social media pages. And most importantly, if you like what you're hearing, please do share these episodes with your family, friends, and community members. Leave us your thoughts, comments, and feedback. We love hearing from you.
TCC is a not-for-profit initiative that is funded by you, the listeners. If you'd like to support the work that we do at TCC, there are different ways that are listed on the support and contribute page of our website, www.thecuriositycollective.org. You can also write to us at team@thecuriositycollective.org or message us on 6300711451 if you feel called to make a contribution to sponsor an episode or a podcast series. This could help us with our research, writing, admin, and editing costs to build further resources that speak to our collective well-being. We hope you'll join us on this journey of co-creating the space to nurture and build cities that are healthy and happy. This podcast was created by Srinidhi Raghavan, Deepika Khatri, and Arpita Joshi. The sound editing was by Vijay Chawla.